Good morning. It is Monday, the 12th day of January, 2026. This is the making of the John Batchelor Show, my show. To demonstrate total transparency, I welcome my colleague and friend of many decades, Bill Roggio, Senior Fellow for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. He and his colleagues keep the Long War Journal, and we will speak much of his workload today with his experts on different parts of the turmoil around the globe. I welcome Bill to a beta of the live streaming of the John Batchelor Show. We are live. Bill, a very good morning to you.
A great morning to you, John. Look, I think you were the second person I've ever done radio with. So it's an honor for me to launch with your beta.
Thanks right. This is streaming, if I understand correctly, with the technology. Sure. This is streaming live. We will record this segment that we're going to speak to on the radio show this evening. We will record that and line that up for the audience. And our topic today will be not only the ISIS strikes in Syria, another one over the weekend, but the Iran turmoil, which is through a glass darkly right now. We're awaiting the ambassador, Husain Haqqani, former ambassador from Pakistan to the United States, and he will join us when he can. Bill and I will begin with a conversation about what we've seen over these last days of turmoil. Bill, your thoughts that the Iran story is clearly pressing in Europe. I see the headlines are burning. The strike on ISIS is a puzzle over the weekend that adds to one that you wrote up on a strike on ISIS last week in Syria. And then we have the large Venezuela story that is unfinished and extremely dangerous. So how do you measure this chaos right now, Bill? Not to leave out Ukraine and all the rest of the troubles in Europe.
Right. For a president who campaigned on no new wars, we certainly seem to be getting ourselves involved in some conflicts here. Not saying all full-blown wars, but it really is fascinating, the chaos. It seems like every weekend or every Monday we wake up and it's just something else on our plate. I guess it's the nature of our business. But the Iranian thing is absolutely astounding. On one hand, John, the pessimist in me, you've known me long enough. The Iranian regime, it's 47, 48 years now in power. They've weathered these types of protests and unrest in the past, but it does feel different this time. And I think this is, to me, this feels like the moment. It shouldn't just be an American moment to help the Iranians. It should be the Europeans. It should be the world. But removing the Iranian regime from power would be a game changer in the entire war on terror or the long war or whatever people choose to call it. It would be fascinating to see what would happen to the Iranian backed militias, their proxies in Yemen and Syria and Iraq and obviously in the Palestinian territories and Lebanon and elsewhere. So I'm tracking that really closely, but it's hard, John, right? We have blackout now, the almost complete blackout in Iran. So how do we even know what's happening? How do we know how the people are responding? And black holes in news, I'm used to those in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan and Pakistan over time, but it's really frustrating to try to follow this story.
The story that is told on the pages of Long War Journal is the best we can come to, transparency. You've got a number of voices. We'll hear from one of them, Jonathan Saya, today of FDD. He was born in Tehran and can help us understand the map that we see of a city of more than 10 million people as they move through the demonstrations. And we're told by reporting out of London, the IRGC and the Basij have been opening fire, and their estimates of anywhere between 60 dead and 4,000 dead. I mean, you can hear anything. It's fog of war. That's Iran. But Bill, I'm reminded in your remarks that we have stories going on right now that we can't get to today. For example, we've invited our colleague Caleb Weiss from Africa to comment on the developing stories, not only of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Africa, but also Russia using recruits they're making in Africa for cannon fodder. That's a story in the Telegraph these last days. We also have reason to believe that the Russians are extremely active in Nigeria, as well as Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. What are they? Why are they active? Because they want the gold. And we've been following that story with Caleb Weiss for some time. We don't have room for it today. Maybe not this week, Bill.
Yep.
Your comments in general, after decades of keeping the Long War Journal, I can't remember anything this chaotic, Bill. Can you?
No, John, I couldn't agree more. Like it used to be easy to cover this war. I think back to the 2000s, right? You had Al Qaeda, then you had Al Qaeda forming its branches, and okay, you could track all that. Then you had the Al Qaeda split, but you didn't have these state-on-state issues: Russia, Ukraine, conflict in Venezuela, the worrying about the Chinese, et cetera, et cetera. Everything has just become infinitely more complex to track. At the Long War Journal, we just used to track what was known as the war on terror, right? The war against Al Qaeda. Then it became the Islamic State and all of the adjacent groups. And now we're tracking state-on-state conflicts. It's such a time suck for me, John, just to keep up, because as editor, I have to understand all these stories. Co-hosting with you, I have to know what's happening in Venezuela. I have to know what's happening in Russia. I have to know what's happening, in Iran.
Our colleague joins us, Bill. Ambassador Haqqani joins us, so we'll welcome him this morning. Mr. Ambassador, this is our maiden voyage in live streaming our conversations in the morning, and I thank you very much for joining us. We jump into a pool that we're not quite confident of, and Bill and I have been commenting on the chaos. I wanted to begin immediately with that question to you. So, because this is the making of the John Batchelor Show, we're total transparency here, quite different from the geopolitical scene that we see. I'm going to begin the countdown, and we will do our 17 and a half minutes in two segments, and we'll just keep talking. And the presenting story will be the chaos that we now see, and I'll list the nations. And this morning, there was an FT editorial op-ed piece by one of their distinguished columnists saying the only comparable period that she could see to what we're now witnessing is the great game of the 19th century between Russia and Persia and the players of Central Asia, including the states that are now India and Pakistan. The great game was played many years, people switching sides all the time, Russia versus Britain. So I will begin. First of all, good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning.
We begin. 5. Gentlemen, we're going to record. Bill, you all set?
All ready, John.
You hear the ambassador fine?
Good morning, Husain. Yes, he sounds great.
Good morning.
4, 3, 2, 1. I'm John Batchelor, and I welcome my good colleagues, Bill Roggio, Senior Fellow for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. He keeps the Long War Journal with his colleagues, and Husain Haqqani, Senior Fellow for the Hudson Institute, former ambassador from Pakistan to the United States. Gentlemen, we gather here today with chaos being reported from London and from Washington and across the Eurasian continent. I list some of what we know is going on. The Iranian matter presses the headlines in part because there's complete lack of clarity as to what has happened overnight, several nights in a row. Protests are obvious. We can see that from videos. But there's a claim of maybe 60 dead, maybe several hundred dead, maybe more than that. There are remarks by the President of the United States that in some fashion the U.S. will intervene if students or young people or protesters are gunned down. That's a term of art. That may or may not be the case. So I mentioned Iran, but in addition, we have the Venezuela story completely unfinished. And then we have not one, but now 2 strikes in Syria against what are said to be ISIS elements. The Ukraine story is unfinished. And the larger story of the Middle East war started in 23 with the attack on Israel by Hamas is also unfinished. So, Mr. Ambassador, I welcome your comments but the chaos that we're now perceiving. How should we regard the threat, and what scale should we regard the threat? Good morning to you.
Good morning. That there is chaos in the world is evident. The reason for that chaos, of course, is that the one country that used to value stability around the world, now it is headed by someone who no longer values stability. So we have at the same time an effort to try and put the former president of Venezuela on trial for narcotics trafficking, while a former president of Colombia who was convicted of the same crime is pardoned. Similarly, there are statements about intervening militarily everywhere without any plan. Look, even in the periods that we see as chaotic, the period immediately after the Napoleonic Wars, the period prior to the First World War, the era of the so-called Great Game in Central Asia and the Middle East, when multiple powers were contending for influence, all those countries paid attention to stability at home and also at making sure that they had reliable allies, that their adversaries were well defined. But here, what we have is the world's most militarily powerful country being run on whims. It's one priority one day and another on another day. If narco-terrorism is the priority, what about narco-terrorism emanating closer to home for the United States from Mexico? The biggest narcotics producers, Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, totally ignored because it is the whim to pay attention to Venezuela. Similarly, in the Middle East, Al Qaeda reorganizing itself in Syria and Afghanistan. But Syria, the leader of Syria, has been already welcomed in the White House. The Taliban are people that the United States brought back effectively by cutting a deal with them. And so we really are in a state of more chaos than normal for humanity because there is no one paying attention and making a plan to deal with the various moving parts of this chaos.
Bill, I welcome your thoughts because you've been keeping the Long War Journal for more than 2 decades now. And how do you think about this as you go through your day? We're going to speak to a number of your colleagues today who have specialties around the world, and no particular priority. So your thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, I echo much of what Husain said. I agree. You know, my concerns, right? We've lost wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, whether our government wants to admit it or not. We've been slowly losing a war in Somalia. Libya was a mess. And yet, you know, it concerns me that we're jumping in, or appear to be jumping into, future conflicts. As far as Iran goes and the stability there, I think the Iranians have no one to blame but themselves. This is not something engineered by the United States, except for perhaps the sanctions. But this is sanctions have been applied on Iran over multiple U.S. presidencies, administrations. The Iranians with their water problems, the way they treat their people, the launching its war against Israel. These are problems the Iranians have created for themselves. But I do agree with Husain. You know, we are in a period where stability does not seem to be a priority for this government. I would probably argue that actions from the Biden administration have contributed to this, that how it handled Syria, how it handled Afghanistan, how it handled Iran, how it handled Ukraine, all contributed to these instabilities that we see today. I think the Biden administration maybe looked more diplomatic in handling these issues. You know, I guess perhaps I'm still mulling this over, John. Like, I'm not even sure that the instability that we're witnessing today, maybe absent Venezuela, are things that were under the control of U.S. presidents. This may just be the way the world is trending.
I mentioned Greenland. We don't have time for it. I mentioned the Federal Reserve. We don't have time for it. I mentioned headlines out of London that suggest that Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah who led Iran before the revolution, is often featured now as a possible replacement for the government. All that is chaos. Mr. Ambassador, I want to go immediately to the action that we see in Syria over the weekend, another strike by the U.S. on what we're told are ISIS targets. Syria is still in a civil war with armed factions shooting at each other. And yet there's the fiction that this is a stable enough country to lift sanctions, and there is the fiction that al-Shah is somehow a leader for this fractured country. How do you measure Syria and the effort that Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, and Washington are putting into it to stabilize it?
Well, look, I mean, Syria is going to end up becoming, if you take the analogy of the great game, be the theater of the great game involving Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and some of Israel's partners and friends from the Middle East and outside. Similarly, Afghanistan will be the arena of contention between India and Pakistan and Russia and possibly Iran, because there is no steadying hand. We have not only, I endorse Bill's view that the United States needs to reevaluate the use of military force, which hasn't proven to be the solution to every problem. We've become in international relations like the man with the hammer who sees every problem as a nail. Every problem will not be solved by military means. Narcotics will continue to come into the United States as long as people are willing to pay the huge amount of money they pay for illegal and illicit narcotics. These things need a much bigger sort of understanding of a problem, but then they need plans. And it's very obvious that we don't have a plan. One day, the issue is whether somebody should share their Nobel Prize with the president rather than any other pressing issue in the world. Similarly, I don't know who said Al-Shara is going to be good for the United States because he isn't proving to be good. And as far as the whole matrix of stability is concerned, stability is attained through the combined efforts of diplomats. We've thrown out most diplomats from their positions and jobs. Um, um, People on the ground who report intelligence services. We've discredited the intelligence services as the deep state, and allies, trustworthy allies. And right now, nobody around the world feels that they are sufficient allies to the United States because they don't know when something they say or do will upset the President of the United States and will cause a rupture in that alliance. So, who can rely on whom? And if it's going to be all about brutal force, how many theaters is the United States going to fight a war in?
Bill, I want your thoughts on Syria when we come back. This is the John Batchelor Show, and I'm very much entertaining the possibility that we've got too much to do and very little time to do it in. So we're going to focus on just what we can see, which is Syria, and some of what this means for the ongoing conflict between Iran and Israel when we come back. Bill Roggio, Senior Fellow for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. Husain Haqqani, former ambassador from Pakistan to the United States, now a Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute. I'm John Batchelor. I'm John Batchelor with my colleagues, Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, and Husain Haqqani, former ambassador from Pakistan to the United States, now at the Hudson Institute as a Senior Fellow. And we are at this point measuring the chaos and no easy way to summarize it. So we're not going to try. We're going to go to Syria. I choose that because for more than a decade and a half now, it has been darkness visible in the Middle East. Iran is the driver and Israel is the target, but Syria is the unsolved wasteland, the darkness visible between the power of Turkey, the power of Israel, the power of the transnational organizations that are seeking a resolution for Lebanon. Iran is also part of this mix. So, Bill, your thoughts about the strike on ISIS? ISIS said to be in the Damascus head neighborhood, strike by the U.S. This is totally confusing to me, Bill, because our allies are the Kurds in the northeast, and yet we're attacking in central Syria. What are your thoughts?
Yes, John. Well, also our ally, because the Trump administration wants them to be, is the Syrian regime, which is led by the man who used to be officially used to be Al-Qaeda's leader in Syria. He still may be to this day. He never denounced his oath of allegiance to Al-Qaeda's emir. The problem with this strike, and CENTCOM has been maintaining this fiction that the Islamic State carried out this attack in December 13th that killed 2 American soldiers and a contractor. Except it wasn't. It was a member of the Syrian security forces. And he was under investigation for jihadist ties, yet he was put in proximity by the Syrian security forces to American troops. And the reality is that Syrian security forces are made up of thousands, if not tens of thousands of members who were part of Al-Qaeda's branch, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or groups like the Turkestan Islamic Party and a host of others that are either straight out Al-Qaeda affiliates or Al-Qaeda allied or sympathetic to Al-Qaeda. So you have jihadists you have Syrian security forces that are comprised of jihadists, and they're being put in close proximity to Americans. And our response is to blame the Islamic State, which is which is a horrible actor in Syria as well, but it's also an enemy of the Syrian regime. We're taking out Ahmed al-Shara, the former head of Al-Qaeda's trash, because he's an enemy of the Islamic State. And we're giving him the credibility and we're giving him cover. It's things like this, John, that make me very concerned about getting involved in foreign conflicts. And if I may, really quick, what Husain was talking about with no one trusts intelligence, no one trusts the diplomats, our allies don't trust us. The inverse of that is true. U.S. intelligence has been abysmal. What they said about Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan or in Syria has been an absolute mess, or the Taliban's ties to Al-Qaeda. When I embedded in Iraq, diplomats did not want to go to Iraq. They had to be forced to go. But there was they wanted nothing to do with going out in places and doing their jobs as diplomats. They said it was too risky for them, but obviously not risky enough for American soldiers. And when it comes to our allies, where have our allies been for us? These things cut both ways. And I'll just also add things like the Russia Gate, right, and U.S. intelligence. There's good reasons why people do not trust the U.S. institutions that have, kept stability in the past, because many of these institutions have become politicized.
Mr. Ambassador, because the next time we meet, we could be dealing with worse and worse in Tehran. What are your thoughts about this remark by the president several times that he's considering military intervention in Iran? My general understanding is Colin Powell's famous remark from the 20th century, you break it, you own it. Is that where we are going in Iran, Mr. Ambassador?
I hope not. I hope that all he's talking about is a few more airstrikes to be able to show that he is doing something about it. Look, getting involved in anybody else's internal wars is always fraught. We learned that in Vietnam. It was actually a fight between South Vietnamese and North Vietnamese. The North Vietnamese were nationalists, but they looked for support first from us and then turned to the communists. There's no inherent conflict between the United States and Vietnam, which is why we are trading. I mean, we all eat Vietnamese shrimp and Vietnamese pho. So Vietnam was not the enemy, but it was portrayed, painted, and I agree that the huge apparatus that we have of intelligence services, etc., they've all lost credibility over the years because they build cases which don't turn out to be completely true. They always show an exaggerated version of US success and others as failures. And then the one thing the US is good at is military capability. So send in American troops. Well, what will they do in Iran? Will they go and try and install the former Shah's son, who hasn't lived in Iran for most of his life, as a will he be able to connect with the people whenever we've done something like that? Have we actually ever been successful? Won't there be regime remnants fighting back, as the Baathists did in Iraq? The Baathists converted themselves into Islamists just to fight the United States.
30
Uh,
seconds.
so,
30 seconds, Mr. Ambassador.
so the consequences of using military force for political problems we don't fully understand and taking sides in other people's conflicts are not going to be good for the United States.
I thank the former ambassador from Pakistan to the United States, Husain Haqqani, now a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, and Bill Roggio, senior fellow from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. There's much more ahead, conversations about Syria in specific, about the Ukraine conflict, certainly about the whole of the Middle East inflamed, and not to leave out the troubles in Venezuela grow constantly because of the intervention by the U.S. in these last hours. Live streaming The John Batchelor Show. I'm John Batchelor. Well done, gentlemen. We pulled it off without knowing what we were doing. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Ambassador.
well, we did good. I think we did good. Yeah, I don't know what to propose as the way forward, except maybe just hold back and let things play out, and
I'm
only
with
do
you,
things
Shane,
when
on that.
they're ups, and when things are just immediately important, pressing, some critical interest is at stake, somebody is about to attack you, you do something about them, but that's it. Otherwise, you see, right now people are using us to settle their scores. This used to happen in Afghanistan. You'll remember that, Bill,
Yep.
when certain tribal leaders who were part of the government used airstrikes to try and take out the rival tribes.
Yeah.
And we had no idea about their tribes. I asked one of the generals who was commander there, do you guys have a tribal map? He said, oh, that would be a good idea. And that's when they decided to do a mapping of the tribes and sub-tribes and their rivalries. They'd already been there for almost 8 years. So this is, yeah, I don't know how this is going to play out, especially for the US.
Yeah, I'm with you, Shane. I've come to the conclusion that we need to be very judicious how we get involved and how we use force, and not everything is our problem. It just isn't.
And not every problem is going to be solved by the military. And not every problem is going to be solved by them.
Yep.
Gentlemen, I want to introduce a guest and colleague of ours who's listening in, but I don't want to keep him from talking. This is David Shedd, former acting director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, a longtime colleague of mine. David, a very good morning to you. We're having a happy conversation about the...
I lost your sound.
The chaos.
I cannot hear you.
All right. I'll get back to you in just a moment.
John, I cannot hear you now.
How's that, Bill?
I cannot hear.
Okay. I'll be right with you. Husain, thank you. Bill?
We'll get Husain dropped.
All right. This is the making of the show. We've got to deal with things like this and make sure that it works. Yeah. See if David Shedd. David, are you hearing me now? David?
Hello?
Yes, I hear you fine.
I cannot.
I see your voice,
John.
and you're hearing me, and I'll figure this out, Bill.
Yep, it happens. It's the classic Zoom. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, David, I would say you should go off. He did what I recommended. He went off and came back. Bill, what we did in the first conversation with Husain was establish that nobody can figure this out. It's too chaotic. It's not just us. And you've mentioned intelligence. That's what David did through his career at the U.S. And he's we're dealing with China this morning. We've not even, I'm going to bring China up, Bill. We didn't have time for it in the first segments.
We launched airstrikes in Nigeria, John.
Here's David back. Let's see if it works this time.
Yep.
Okay.
How's that, David? Can you hear me?
Perfect. Perfect. Hear
David,
you loud and clear now.
this is the making of the show, so showing the bumps is okay. It's what we deal with when we make the show. David, I wanted to introduce you, a very good friend and colleague of mine, Bill Roggio of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. He keeps the Long War Journal. Bill and I have been together for more than 2 decades. We're approaching 3 decades. And Bill, I introduce you to David Shedd, my good colleague, who was a former acting director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, is a veteran of intelligence operations in Washington and around the world in these last decades, and is now the author of a new book. Bill, get ready. We're going to China. Okay, enough about Syria. China's epic campaign to steal America's secrets. And the reason I've asked David to join us this morning, not only because what he has to say is always wonderful, was the article in the Financial Times out of Washington in these last days. China hacked email system of U.S. Congressional Committee staff, goes the headline. Beijing's intelligence used Salt Typhoon to access communications used by top panels in the U.S. Congress. We're looking at not a past heist, not something in the first decade or the second decade, not something with the conversations between Barack Obama and Hu Jintao, or the conversations between Barack Obama and Xi Jinping. We're looking at something that just was revealed. So I want to turn to that. David, I want to give you a chance to your thoughts about the chaos throughout the world before we focus on China. Iran, Ukraine, Venezuela, and then we have Syria and the ISIS strikes, not to leave out the ongoing conflict in Gaza and the ongoing conflict in Lebanon. In your experience, David, does this describe a period that you worked through and in your work before, to have these many hotspots simultaneously? Good morning, David.
Good morning, and good morning, Bill. Nice to meet you as well. This demonstrates, certainly in my lifetime of 6.5 decades, unprecedented number of events occurring, conflicts unfolding throughout the global spectrum. And what we see is really a fracturing in many regards to the global scene in terms of spheres of influence around these conflicts. And I'll be happy to talk about China as it applies to the Far East, and in terms of the preparation of whatever Xi Jinping and the Chinese are doing when it comes to Taiwan. But so the conflicts that have not yet unfolded outright in terms of bellicose activity soon could be in the making. You also did not mention, the potential collapse of Cuba as a result, again, in a hemisphere that I know very well, having grown up in it and really focused on Latin America for a good portion of my career as well. And so this is really unprecedented, as you suggest, and multidimensional in so many ways.
We'll begin our conversation about your book, but of course we can range in any direction, because when they steal secrets from all theaters. Bill, you all set. The book is The Great Heist, China's Epic Campaign to Steal America's Secrets. David Shedd and his colleague Andrew Badger just published. David and I have had a lengthy conversation about this, but I wanted David's opportunity with David to talk about this recent hacking that we've seen, and why China continues to do this, though they've been caught at it so many times. So we'll begin right away, gentlemen. This is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm John Batchelor. I welcome my colleague Bill Roggio for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. Keeps the Long War Journal. And there's chaos around the planet, but not to leave out the threat of the People's Republic of China in the guise of cyber spying, cyber espionage, cyber sabotage. A new book, The Great Heist, China's Epic Campaign to Steal America's Secrets, just published by David Shedd and Andrew Badger. And our colleague David Shedd joins us now. David is the former acting director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, many decades of work in U.S. intelligence, and the book, The Great Heist, tells the story. It's maddening, but it's there, of the concerted effort of the Chinese Communist Party to steal everything that isn't nailed down, and most of what's nailed down in the US government and the governments of our allies these many years. And now we have this article from the Financial Times that I welcome you, David, to comment on. China hacked email systems of US Congressional Committee staff. Subhead: Beijing's intelligence used Salt Typhoon, capital S, capital T, to access communications used by top panels in US Congress. That is January 7th, 2026. Nothing out of date about this. Nothing will stop it, said Hu Jintao. We'll stop it, said Xi Jinping. David, a good morning to you. The article in the Financial Times, not news to you. Is it news to the Trump administration that China remains the outsized threat? Good evening to you.
Good evening to you as well, and delighted to talk to your audience about what is really best characterized in the case of the Chinese cyber activities as campaigns. Salt Typhoon, and just for baselining in terms of the naming or the nomenclature associated with this, comes from Microsoft, and there is the Salt Typhoon and there's Volt Typhoon. And in the last 18 months, there are 7 additional campaigns that have been identified by the Chinese in the cyberspace in terms of both collecting information, and I'll mention then, of course, and address the question about the Hill hacking in terms of 4 specific committees in a second. But these campaigns are intended not only to collect the information, but also to embed themselves in terms of cyber tools that in the event of conflict with China, there's a kill switch, there's an on and off toggle, and they sit there inside the systems of infrastructure. Think of our electric grid, water, and all the rest. That is Volt Typhoon. And those have been identified really in segments in the years since 2021, when they were first identified by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, along with other elements of the National Security Agency and other U.S. government agencies.
This was detected just in December, David. Do I say that correctly? When we had our conversation about your book in December, it was just being revealed by the U.S. government to itself.
That's correct. Although I believe that, like so many things that are in the classified world, there might have been an identification of it previous to December, but certainly now publicly revealed. The target for Salt Typhoon, when it applied to what we know or what has been revealed at the unclassified level, are 4 committees in particular. The Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party in the House, as well as both intelligence oversight committees that I dealt with over my career in terms of the Senate and the House, and then foreign relations. And you ask yourself, or the audience might ask itself, why those in particular? Those would be at the top of the list of Chinese requirements to know the focus of attention by these oversight committees when it comes to their email exchanges and all of that. So I presume that the Chinese now have all the email exchanges among the staff and members of those committees associated with upcoming hearings, upcoming reports that are going to be done by those committees as a result of this. But let me just say, this is a small piece of Salt Typhoon. In other words, that's why it's a campaign that focuses on specific requirements that they're going after. And in this case, the Financial Times story is about the unique aspects of going after these 4 committees.
Bill, you have a comment or question for David Shedd.
David, great to meet you. Has the U.S. imposed any costs on the Chinese for these nefarious activities? And are we conducting a similar campaign to penetrate the Chinese government's infrastructure?
Well, Bill, let me start with your latter question. Are we conducting those campaigns? Obviously, I cannot talk about the classified aspects of this, but I know that the National Security Agency and Cyber Command, which is its partner in this in terms of the external threats that we face from cyber, are very, very capable, and they have the capabilities, the tools, the people to conduct these sorts of things if that's required. And of course, that can't be revealed publicly in terms of doing that. I find that the administration, now going to your first question, Bill, is somewhat caught in a catch-22, in that the revelation of these sorts of things and responding to it beyond what we would know in our past professional life as demarches to the Chinese, bad, 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 stop doing that, really doesn't carry any weight, as we have seen with the Chinese. And the Great Heist in my book points out they've become increasingly brazen, and in terms of their attacks, and brazen in terms of even having it publicly revealed. As we all know, they get up to the podium very soon after something's publicly revealed, deny, deny, deny. But the fact that they can conduct it in a manner that really doesn't appear, and I underscore appear, to have repercussions for them in terms of additional sanctions and all that, tells me that it's a very complicated relationship between the United States and China when it comes to the kinds of dependencies that we have on China, such as rare earth minerals at the present time, and magnets. And we've seen that debate publicly in terms of President Trump's response to that in backing down in terms of tariffs on China and the sale of Russian oil to China and in that regard. So it strikes me that they have us a little bit in a corner in terms of how we respond to this, beyond, of course, the sort of template of the démarche that goes to Beijing and says, stop doing this.
David, does it surprise you, the quote from Mark Warner, he's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Agency, that it's not being paid attention to? He says, the quote in the Financial Times is that it's baffling that there was not more attention paid to Salt Typhoon. He then goes on to say they can pick any one of us. Jake Sullivan, former national security advisor for the Biden administration, says that private companies are highly vulnerable. So it's not just the U.S. government that's targeted by Salt Typhoon. So Washington knows, but they don't know. How does it work, David?
So Washington does know. But we're back to Bill's question, what's the response to it? We know that, for example, under the campaign known as Salt Typhoon, they penetrated, that is, the Chinese penetrated well over half a dozen of our telecommunications companies, ranging from Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Spectrum, and the rest of them. What were they getting? They were getting metadata, they were getting the text exchanges and that sort of thing, in violation, of course, of American citizens' privacy and all the rest. When Senator Warner says we're not doing enough of it, I have to sort of react to that as someone who has the access to the classified briefings as the ranking member of the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence. He should know that, in fact, there are answers to Bill's second question that he had asked in terms of our capabilities and how we're responding to it. The fact is, and this is where I think we do have to acknowledge this, we have underappreciated and understated for a number of years the Chinese capabilities to access our systems, and we have not had our defenses up as they should be. And that is in corporate America, and then that is in the US government. I wrote the book in part driven by what happened with the Office of Personnel and Management hacking that the Chinese did in May of 2015, as I've previously told you, John, in which 22.5 million records and security dossiers of everyone with a top secret SCI clearance were taken and now reside at the Ministry of State Security, their intelligence organization. That is the combination of CIA, FBI, NSA, a geospatial agency, and cyber command. This is a massive stealing of our data for the purposes of building up their adversarial relationship with the United States in the conduct of their activity.
The book is The Great Heist, China's Epic Campaign to Steal America's Secrets. David Shedd and Andrew Badger, the authors. Highly recommend. But because David's here, I'm going to ask him to stay to comment on the situation in the Americas right now, which is as disturbing, chaotic, challenging, promising, mysterious as anything in Eurasia. Bill Roggio, Senior Fellow for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. I'm John Batchelor. I'm John Batchelor with Bill Roggio, my colleague and friend from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and we're very pleased to welcome David Shedd, who's going to do double duty for us because David's the author of a new book, The Great Heist, China's Epic Campaign to Steal America's Secrets, with his colleague Andrew Badger. That's about Chinese cyber warfare. China's a major player, major for the balance of this century and beyond. We, though, are going to pay attention to the Americas right now because we live here. This is the Western Hemisphere. And David, as the former acting director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and before that, many years in U.S. intelligence, has a skill that exceeds his portfolio in the Americas. He's traveled there widely, understands all these capitals, and they're moving around right now. But Venezuela, David, your comments about what we see in Venezuela now, it's incomplete, very difficult. The president is now talking to the major oil companies about investing private enterprise into rebuilding Venezuela's fields. I won't characterize any more than that. The whole hemisphere is on the phone talking. Bogota's talking, Brasilia's talking, Managua's talking, certainly Havana's talking. How do you measure the situation right now, given the chaos, David?
Well, I first have to do a shout out to the operation that rendered Nicolas Maduro and his wife to the Southern District of New York for prosecution for their activities ranging from drug trafficking and a number of other criminal activities. So 9 days ago, in terms of January 3rd. From there on out, there is, as you describe, a clear messaging from the administration that the tolerance level for outside intervention throughout the region is certainly going to be addressed. And I think that that's the larger message from the removal of Maduro from power as the unelected, self-declared president of Venezuela since July of 2024, when the elections were held, and it was a clear mandate for the opposition to come in there. As Secretary of State Rubio has clearly outlined these three phases, we're in now the phase of the engagement of talking to the oil companies in terms of restoring the basis for wealth for the Venezuelan people, while at the same time ensuring that the levers of power under Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's now former vice president and acting president of Venezuela, enables this, and how that gets enforced is to be seen, but you're certainly seeing it in terms of taking over these oil tankers, these shadow tankers in the Caribbean and all of that. So the message is clear. After 8 million long-suffering Venezuelans that have left Venezuela, as well as the 20 million that remain in Venezuela, are facing a clear change in scenario from the 26 years that they have lived under Hugo Chavez until 2013, when he passed away of natural causes, and Nicolas Maduro came to power as his vice president and was removed on January 3rd. And so the message throughout the region, and I would point out that Cuba is probably the one that is taking greatest note of this, which I believe we're not a long way from seeing a natural collapse, for it's in economic shambles, and it's a regime of strongmen that are, as Secretary Rubio said, sort of somewhere between foolish and inept in terms of ruling Cuba, that is probably next. The Ortegas, Daniel and Rosario in Nicaragua, are another case in point. We have seen a decided shift in the Latin America region to the right. Javier Milei led the sort of the front point in Argentina, but now you see it in Chile, you see it in Bolivia after decades of Evo Morales' influence of the socialists there. You see it with Noboa in Ecuador, and I believe in the May elections of this year, you will see a return of the center to center right in Colombia in replacement of Petro. So you see a decided shift. Later in this year, in October, I do not think the left will win again with President Lula running in Brazil, but it will go to the right as well. So you see a clear shift. The other point that I want to make and underscore is that this is a clear message to the Russians and the Chinese, the Iranians, to the degree that they're present, and they have been present and are present in Venezuela, along with Hezbollah, that this day of their free reign throughout the region is over. And the response of this, and I remind the audience that this all started with the Panama Canal right about this time 1 year ago, in terms of the new administration coming into office and talking about the Chinese influence in our national interests in terms of control of the Panama Canal, in terms of both ends of the canal by Chinese entities at the ports. And so this is a much bigger message than just Venezuela.
Bill, we have a couple of minutes for a question.
Yes, David, you anticipated my question about which country would stands to lose the most. I think you were quite clear that would be Cuba. The Trump administration's justified the action, legitimately so, based on the Venezuela being a narco state. But we have drugs coming from many countries from South America, probably Mexico being the biggest problem. What message does this send to the cartels? And does the action we've taken in Venezuela mean that we may be taking more significant action in countries like Mexico?
David, it's a big question. You have a minute. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, just very quickly. The Mexicans and their cooperation with security on our side has never been better under Claudia Sheinbaum. A real change from the previous administration of López Obrador. That said, these cartels are clearly taking a message that they could be next. And let's be very clear, Mexico is the epicenter in terms of approximately 10 cartels that are involved in the not only trafficking, but the precursors that come in from China for fentanyl and all of that. And so this decided shift to message Mexico that security cooperation is not voluntary, it is a must for the Trump administration, is I think what we're going to be seeing for days to come. Now, whether kinetic action is taken unilaterally by the United States and Mexico, I think that really crosses a significant threshold in terms of the concerns that we would have with Mexico and our relationship bilaterally with them.
David Shedd and Andrew Badger, the author of The Great Heist, China's Epic Campaign to Steal America's Secrets. Bill Roggio, Senior Fellow for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. I'm John Batchelor. Thank you, gentlemen. That was live streaming. David, this is our premiere show, and it's a pleasure to welcome you. You were the Swiss Army knife of conflict this morning.
Well, you did well with the questions, and I hope I did well with the responses.
And David, because you've done this, I can call on you for the Americas as well as the Chinese stories. Is that fair-minded, David?
That is.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm
just among the three of us, I'm having lunch with Juan Guaido here in about 3 hours down here in Miami, which is where I live. Well, Hollywood, but north of Miami. And I should get and he was called up to Washington for the consultations about phase 3 having to do with how do you do the political transition that's to come.
Yes, the way it was presented to me yesterday was 4 families are battling it out. Delcy Rodriguez, Diosdado Cabello, the
Cabello.
Interior Minister, and Padrino Lopez, the Minister of Defense. Madura's gang left behind, and then Jorge, Delcy Rodriguez's brother. So we have
the illegitimate head of the National Assembly that Juan Guaido was till 2019. Yeah.
So a great game afoot, and thank you, David. Bill, we will speak. Before we go, Bill, because we've got a few minutes, your comment, Bill, about how this went for you this morning, live streaming. What do you think, Bill?
Fascinating and enjoyable. David, great to meet you. Excellent guest. And Husain, we always vibe. Yeah, no, it's great, John. I'm looking forward to doing this.
This is the first time we've done this, David. For complete transparency, this is how we make the show.
Yeah.
That's great. And Bill, I will be at FTD next Thursday, with Ivana Stradner and Craig Singleton on a panel in DC on gray warfare, the tools and capabilities of our adversaries, and how they are working together to simply undermine our interests. That is on the 22nd at FDD at noon to 1:30.
I'm not based in DC. I'm based in New Jersey, PA, depending. Okay. But let me see if I can make it up. I'd love to meet you.
Are you putting it on air, David? To your knowledge, are they going to stream it?
It'll be streamed.
Yeah,
the invitation's gone out from Lisa on public affairs there, and it's so it's already on the the people's invite list.
All right,
so it'll be live.
David, what is gray warfare? What is that?
So this combination of non-kinetic, although it can include that, but it is information warfare. It's influence operations aimed at controlling the narrative, controlling policy and political decision-making around influence of hearts and minds. In other words, the way that TikTok is being used, among others, that provide that. Now, in the case of Putin, there could be kinetic in unique cases. It's cyber warfare. It's everything but dropping big bombs on the targets. And it can be anything you want it to be.
I mentioned that Ivana Stradner is a colleague of all of ours for many years. Ivana is a born Serbian and a particular interest in the Balkans and how they're manipulated by Moscow. She's keen on Moscow. Moscow is very good at this.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, maybe not yet the Chinese level, but we don't know. Gentlemen, we're going to end this. David, my regards. We'll talk again soon. Bill, my regards. We'll talk again later in the program. This is the John Batchelor Show. Live streaming is going to end. We're going to attend to the making of the rest of the day. Chaos 1, 2, 3, and 4. Thank you for tuning in. And a good day to everyone in America and around the planet, especially you in India.